private action may not solve all problems related to internalities, just like we discussed in the case of actionalities, and then private action does not solve all actionality problems. And it's not always the case that people can sort it out amongst themselves, and similarly, it's not always the case that you can sort it out in between yourself and between your present self and your future self, and you may keep making the same mistakes. So those problems could be pervasive, and it could lead to very poor outcomes for large parts of the population, and the government may then actually help us to make the right choices. This is obviously a very different ground for government intervention. Up to now, we discussed externalities, public goods, and next week market power, and those are sources of market failure that are related to people knowing what is best for themselves, and they do what is best for themselves, but the consequences of their actions are such that the outcome is inefficient. In this case, actually, people may not do what is good for themselves. They know it, but they just don't do it. And so this is what we call paternalistic policy, and the government actually knows what is best for us and helps us to make those choices, the right choice. Now, obviously, that then the question is, how does the government actually know what is good for me? That they're saying it, but well, there's basically two ways, right? So first of all, there's stated preferences. So you could actually ask people whether they often regret choices. So we can ask that within a specific context, and whether they would really like to do something about it. So whether they actually realize that they do have a self-control problem, for example, saving for later, and based on these survey responses, we could say that there is a ground for government intervention. Alternatively, we may look at so-called revealed preferences. So in that case, we don't look at what people say, but we look at what people do. And if we do see that there is a big gap between what people plan to do and what they actually do, then we know that indeed there is this problem here, there's an internality here. Earlier on, I gave you the example of physical exercise. There was a study showing that the planned number of times that people want to visit the gym is much higher, sort of like 50% higher than the actual number of visits. And there's also a nice study by Galuk Karel with the title Estimating Biases in Smoking Cessation, Evident from a Field Experiment. And they do something very similar. So they asked smokers initial evaluation of a treatment that should help them to stop their addiction, and then they compare this to the actual take-up of the treatment, and there's a gap, i.e. showing that there's a big self-control problem here. One common response among policymakers is the idea that if only people are aware of what is the right thing to do, then they will follow up on this. So there's, for example, this campaign, Just Say No against drugs. And there's this lady here, this is actually an old example. You may remember her, and that's Nancy Reagan. And what do you think? Is this going to be helpful? Probably not, because the problems that we are talking about here are not related to the fact that you don't know what is right to do. You just are not able to do the right thing. So it may just be a nuisance. Those people telling you, you're making the wrong choices. Yeah, that doesn't really help, right? So what can the government do effectively? Well, first of all, the government can just regulate certain behaviors. So in that sense, the government decides for us. Examples of government regulations are a ban on alcohol consumption by people younger than 80. Or at least, there's a ban on buying alcohol either at a grocery store or in a bar. There's a mandate to attend school until the age of 16. And there's also a mandate for certain anti-theft devices to be installed in your car. Only then those cars can be sold on the market. And that's actually a European regulation. So those are regulations. So then we basically take people's freedom away and we impose certain behaviors on them, either by way of a mandate or a ban. We can also impose a tax on overconsumed goods, or sinful goods. One example is the alcohol excise tax. But for investment goods, we may actually want to think about a subsidy. For instance, that there's free school fruit at many schools, and the idea is that as a result, children are more likely to consume fruit. Obviously, whether taxes and subsidies work depends on the price elasticity. There's a small picture here taken from a study by Tabinski et al. Showing that for instance, that there's a strong demand for sugary drinks is strongly price elastic, so a tax on sugar drinks may work, but obviously there's many things that you have to take into account before you start taxing people. So you have to trade off all of those social values before you start to indeed tax sugary drinks. So those are two ways, and then there's also a more subtle way in which governments may help people to make the right choices. Those are called nudges. The whole idea is that the government helps you to make the right choices, but it allows you to deviate. And so it's not like a mandate or a ban, but it's like not allowing coffee shops to be too close to schools. So still, if you want to go to a coffee shop, that's fine, but it just takes a little more effort, and as a result, the present bias may have a more limited effect on behavior of youth. Other examples are healthy choices for school lunch being presented at eye level, so you're more likely to consume those rather than the pieces of pizza and all that are at a lower level. Still, if you want to consume pizza, it's totally possible. It just makes it more likely that you follow up on your plans to eat healthy and to remain at a healthy weight. Warning on cigarette packs are another example. And obviously, that even though those nudges do not take freedom of decision away in the way that bans and mandates do, they do impact your behavior. So also you have to weigh this policy against the infringement of liberty. An example of a mandated consumption of an investment good is here in the Netherlands a regulation of built-in security in homes. So in 1999 the building code was revised, and the building code is basically a long list of requirements that any newly built home is required to those are rules for all newly built homes in 1999, one of the new rules was that all window and door frames needed to be burglary proof, and also the locks need to be burglary proof. And in a study together with Jan van Oers, we showed that had a large effect on the chance of being burgled. That went down by like 25%. You may see it as a disadvantage that you take freedom away because this is all mandated. So you buy a new home and it has all of the burglary proof windows and doors, frames and locks installed, but you can also see that as an advantage, and so you don't need to bug people about, oh, it's so important to have proper locks, etc. You help people making the right decision by just deciding it for them. Another example are bicycle helmet laws. In certain countries, including Canada, wearing those helmets is actually mandated for youth, and there's studies into the effects on behavior and whether this actually improves welfare or no. Let's look at how such a mandate works out. So we had our unbiased demand for this investment good. So then we are at we are at Q star, right? But we also had the biased demand, and we may forget about the benefits in the future. So we may be at Q1 instead. If we then mandate consumption, then we end up at Q mandated. So 100% of consumers here then have to consume these anti-burglary measures, or 100% of youth will have to wear those helmets. And if Q mandated is at a higher level than Q star, then we may actually overdo it. And so then we are also forcing things on people that do not really on the net benefit from it. And so there's there may be also welfare loss, and there's a welfare gain because we actually push certain people towards the right choice, but that has to be weighed against a welfare loss of a mandate in the case that Q mandated is higher than Q star. Now, rather than mandating or regulating, there may also be nudges that are more subtle. There's an example here of a nudge at a German university, and it all started with an introductory lecture for students at the beginning of the year, telling them that about those self-control problems and how they can best organize their studies. A certain share of students are also reminded of that introductory lecture and the idea of actually studying during the semester later on during the semester, so they get this reminder. And a share of students are asked to sign an agreement saying that they will adhere to the exam schedule recommended by the university. If they don't, that has no consequences. It's just a so-called commitment contract. It's a type of commitment device that is meant to help you to actually study during the semester as you planned to do at the beginning of the semester, before you were in all of those hot states, so to say. Now, what does this field experiment, what did they find actually in this field experiment? So they find no evidence of any effect of those reminders. Just being told like, hey, do you remember what you are planning to do? Has no effect. But the commitment contract, so signing an agreement, that did have a substantial effect on behavior. Also important here in the abstract of that study is that they document that the commitment device, so signing this agreement, changes the behavior of procrastinators, where it does not affect the outcomes of non-procrastinators. So we're really at the margin here, and at the margin, there are students who fail to follow up on their study plans, and those students actually, they really benefit from this commitment contract, because without this contract they would study too little during the semester, and with this contract they actually study as much as they really want. Similarly, for Microeconomics 2, we could also have an introductory lecture and offering you the choice to follow sort of the intensive version of the course, including all the tutorials with the exercises and with the quizzes and all that, and then you actually sign this agreement. Yes, I will do so, and this is going to affect my grade and all that. Or you can say, well, I don't need it. So all of the students that do want to study during the semester and make exercises to get some practice and all that, then they may be more likely to do so. In this case, actually, we do not do any nudging, but we actually mandate it. We just require you to make the quizzes and the exercises and to be present at debates and the experiment. We cannot force you to attend those sessions, but if you don't, then it has large negative consequences for your grade. There's no opt-out here. Ideally, a nudge moves consumption of the investment goods to the optimal level. If that's all it does, then this is optimal, right? There's only a welfare gain from the nudge. Now, the very last point is that why would you actually want to vote for a law that restricts your behavior? For example, when we look at guns, why would you actually support a law that makes it very difficult to own a gun, as is the case in the Netherlands and many other countries here in Western Europe? Now, there may be two reasons for supporting such a law. First of all, you're worried about your neighbor, so you don't want others to use this gun against you. The trouble with guns is that the consequences tend to be irreversible. Knocking someone over the head, and that may be sort of have a 1 month consequence or a 1 week. But a gun, if it's lethal, then there may be a reason to support such a law, because if someone actually uses that gun against you, it may be the end of your life. But there may be another reason. You do not trust yourself to make the right choices, and you want to support this law to prevent yourself from making a terrible mistake if you're a sophisticated consumer of guns. So what did we learn this week? And we don't always do what we want. We may also take decisions that are against our own self-interest. That may be due to present bias. And that is relevant for goods for which it holds that either the benefits or the costs occur in the future rather than in the here and now, and the government can help us to make the right decision if we cannot come up with good commitment devices, and government policy can take the form of taxes, regulations, and nudges.